Hey Siobhan, how you doing?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Good, good, good.
You guys have power over there?
Yes. You guys?
No.
You guys don't have power.
Nope. Have had power since I don't know. We're on 2 days now.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah.
Oh, okay. Is
So
it is it just is it just your block, or do you know if it extends further down the block?
it stems further. So my mom, so thank you so much, Representative Hall, for being with us this evening. Um the reason why reached out to you to have this conversation was because, over the last few months, we've been doing a lot of civic engagement throughout the community. And oftentimes people have the perspective of uh, elected officials aren't doing too much or just things of that nature. So they're not really, so they have expectations sometimes that aren't really, a state legislator's duties or a mayoral duty. And so really just to talk about, your role in educate, make people more informed voters, help them to be more informed voters about expectations and holding elected officials accountable. So if you wanted to, start the conversation, introducing yourself, the district that you cover, and when not only the district number, but kind of the streets to get people that sort of visual, as well as your role in sort of kind of the process of getting resources to communities, making policies, etc.
Sure. So thank you, Siobhan, for inviting me uh, this evening. State Representative Joshua Hall. I represent the seventh district of Hartford, the areas of Blue Hills, parts of Clay Arsenal, parts of Northeast, parts of Upper Albany, parts of Asylum Hill. So my parts of Frog Hollow, for that matter. So my district is in terms of the city is very diverse from a geographic and a population perspective. The state capital, for example, is in my district. My district runs, it's a very oblong district, comparatively speaking, with the shapes of everybody else's district. Theirs are more uniform. Mine runs very differently. So I am the vice chair of the Labor and Public Employees Committee at the state legislature. I'm also on the Transportation and Planning and Development Committees. Those are my official roles at the state capitol. In terms of resources, part of what we do as legislators um, is try to ensure that resources are provided to the districts and or cities that we represent. Whether it be bond money, whether it be other types of resources, that's what happens. And so what we try to do, just similarly speaking, so if you look at it from a national government perspective, our U.S. and representatives and our senators, they try to get resources from the federal government to come to Connecticut. Those resources get passed through our state government and hopefully down to locality. And so that's ultimately what we do as well from a state perspective is we try to get resources at the state level to ensure that our communities have the resources. And then our local politicians, when we say local, we're referring to our mayor and city council will then determine from what they can do or what they should do with those resources. However, there are ways in which, from a state perspective, we specifically allocate resources for this project or that project. And so there is very little discretion that the city has with regard to some of the resources that we send uh, to the city. You're on mute.
So in addition to providing, financial resources, just recently you guys did a lot of policy work, which is really important. And so if you can speak to policy in a sense of me or another resident, noticing something within their community or something within the state needs to be changed. or has, some sort of idea? What is your role as far as policy in making changes in that regards?
So each legislator has the ability, and I would argue responsibility, to think about legislation that needs to be passed to rectify issue, whether it's directly impacting the constituents I represent or the entire state for that matter. So from our perspective, we're the representative of our constituents, and so we're not the sole idea people, right? And so part of what our responsibility is to think about what our constituents have been asking for, calling for, and use our power to then try to push policy that addresses those things. So we welcome the opportunity to hear from our constituents regarding a variety of different issues. As an example, uh, one of the things I was pushing for before the COVID pandemic put a halt to everything is what are called welfare liens. So welfare liens are liens that the state actually takes out on personal property of individuals who receive state assistance. And Connecticut is actually one of the few states that actually goes after folks if they, for example, inherit a house or get some type of disability payment because they were in an accident. Connecticut actually tries to claw back those funds that they paid to that individual or that individual's family over time. And so what I was trying to do and hope to do, either in the, knock on wood, another special session that's going to come up in September or in January, to reintroduce that bill to ensure that folks don't have to do those things. And so we are hearing that from our constituents, and so that's part of what we want to make sure that happens. As an example.
Okay.
And so just to follow up a little bit, every one of my constituents should have received what is called a capital report in the mail. And so one of the things I make sure that's always important for me, as just before I even became elected official, is being able to get in direct contact with my representative, my city council, my mayor, or what have you. And so what I do is I put my cell phone, my personal cell phone number on this handout or this newsletter that goes out to all of my constituents. So they have direct access to me by, they can text me, they can call me on my cell phone. A lot of times, folks trying to get in touch with their representative or their senator have to go through all kinds of levels of bureaucracy, voicemail, or folks just aren't responding. And I want to make sure that as far as my constituents are concerned, or just anybody in general, that my information is public and they can contact me about any issue. And really they should, because I think, as you indicated, folks don't necessarily know what they should be addressing with their state representative or their state senator. And so from my perspective, they need to contact us, and at minimum, we should be able to direct them to the place to go, or the people to contact. And that's part of what we should be doing as well.
So outside of purely contacting you specifically, but if someone outside of, the 7th district wanted to contact their state rep or their state senator, one, how would they find out, who that person was? And two, what would be the best mode of communication with their elected official?
So we have the CGA website, which is www.cga.ct.gov.
Mm-hmm.
There's a pull down tab as far as representation. You put in your address and it will pop up who your state representative and state senator are. So then their contact information would be there as well, and they would email them, right? So I'm a firm believer in putting things in writing, right? Okay. So I would always, contact somebody in writing because I guess you can explain a lot better and trying to get her in, and maybe it's a simple answer to your question, and maybe calling. Folks have, voicemails that are, 100 people deep as far as the voicemail is concerned. But I know, especially during this time, a lot of folks are checking their emails.
Okay.
Just because we all been at home, we have time. So in terms of that, I would say send an email with
Okay.
regard to whatever the issue or the question would be. And we have aides, so we have each of us has a legislative aide, and our legislative aides frequently check our emails as well, and they
Okay.
would be able to respond if for some reason we were a little bit too busy, and it's an easy question to answer, because that's always helpful, because sometimes it literally is just, okay, contact this person in regard to X, Y, or Z. I think that alleviates a lot of the concerns.
Okay. So you brought up I mean, a great proposal for a policy earlier, the welfare policy. I think, I mean, it's really important, and I've heard it as well as, I mean, that being an issue. And so I would say, what role could residents play in helping you sort of push that forward? I mean, how do residents get involved in that legislative process?
So part of it. So you have your representative who's pushing a particular issue, and
Mm-hmm.
so contacting the state senator that also represents that same district would be helpful. But it's also everybody has their network, right? And so their network often extends beyond their block or their neighborhood or their city for that matter. And if it's something that's really important to you, it's important to reach out to your network and have them contact their representatives and their senators as well, to let them know that this issue is important to them, because the broader the reach, if folks in Ellington are hearing that this is an issue from their constituents, the representative there is going to have to respond to let his constituents know why they think that's not an important issue, as an example. So I think that's something that folks can and definitely should be doing on a variety of different issues. As an example, we know that since what happened in Minneapolis,
Mm-hmm.
as far as police transparency and accountability, that's something the legislature has been working on in various iterations for decades now. But it came to a head, as we know, with what happened in Minneapolis and folks wanting to do something about it. So I'm a representative. I represent the 7th District in Hartford, but I'm hearing from folks in Cromwell and Wallingford and Greenwich. And so I'm hearing from folks from all across the state.
Okay.
But I would say that the most important thing any constituent can do, yes,
Mm-hmm.
it's good to send letters to other people's representatives
Mm-hmm.
and state senators, but the most important thing you can do is to contact your specific state representative, state senator, because they have to ultimately answer to you, right? So they're gonna, every 2 years, they're gonna be asking for your vote.
Okay.
And so it's incumbent upon them to explain themselves of why they either supported something or didn't support something or didn't respond or what have you. And so contacting your state representative and state senator, and getting on a first name basis with folks, right? So it's we knock on doors, we do a lot of different things, go to forums, community events, we do all these different things, but we represent somewhere in the area of 20,000 people. But part of an informed constituency is making sure I, as the representative, I, as the constituent, have a direct line of communication with the person who represents me at the state capitol.
Okay. And you also mentioned earlier about the financial resources and the state sort of allocating, I mean, different lines of funding to our local governments, I mean, in order to get done, kind of how that money funnels from the federal government. So what is exactly, I guess, you would say your role between the state and the local government? So for instance, you gave them a pot of money to do X, Y, and Z. How does the state make sure that, I mean, that gets done?
So right. So everything that is sent to state governments, it all has to be accounted for.
Okay.
Some resources, to be perfectly honest, are discretionary, right? And so that's just funding. So as an example, we have the ECS grant. The ECS grant is the educational cost sharing grant. That is money that the state gives to the city of Hartford for its schools. The state doesn't say that these dollars have to be for X, Y, and Z, but they have to be used for they have to be used for education as an example. So as an example, But there are other examples, for example, like school bonding money, right? So the project at Weaver, the project at Martin Luther King, there's bonding money that's specifically allocated for the construction or renovation of those schools, and that money has to be utilized for that express purpose.
So, for example, because so if a person has, so let's talk about the types of things that residents should be calling you for, or they should be calling their local government for, kind of differentiating those things. So what are some examples of things that they should be calling their elected official for as opposed to calling their local government for?
So I'll give you a perfect example. So say there's an issue with Connecticut Transit.
Yep.
So that is not something that the city of Hartford would deal with. That is a state agency. And so therefore somebody would contact me regarding whether the rates are too high or the routes that the Connecticut Transit are taking. And so that would be something, or if they are on Husky A, for example, that's something that's run, a program that's run through the state. And so they would contact their state representative if they're having an issue. Unemployment, as an example, that is not something that is a city function, that is a state function.
Okay.
So therefore, they would contact their state representative or state senator with regard if they're having an issue with unemployment, or they're having an issue with DDS, DSS. So any issue that they may be having, or that their resources can be helpful for them from the state, they need to contact, or they should be contacting their state representative or their state senator if they're having issues with that. Board of Pardon and Parole. So if they're interested, interested in getting a pardon or something along those lines, they should contact their state representative or state senator, because we can often advocate for them through that process. And so anything that's on the state level like that. However, if your trash wasn't picked up that day, now you can call me. Right? And so all I would do is call somebody at the city. But I would say that the most important thing folks on the city level can do if they're dealing with quality of life issues, and I do it all the time, is dial 311 and file a complaint with 311, or go online to the online 311 system, so they make sure that whatever issue they may be having is dealt with by the city. So that's in a nutshell what we deal with as opposed to the types of calls that we expect. But like I said in the beginning, if you don't know and you only have the contact for one person, right? contact that person, right? So because what I would do is I would get that information and I would just hand it off to somebody at the city. And I think arguably vice versa, if you have a city council person or you have direct contact with the mayor or somebody in the mayor's office, they would often say, you know what, contact your state representative, because they can probably address this in a more expedient fashion. And so it goes both ways.
Okay. And so could you speak to kind of, I guess, the process? So if I were to say, Rep. Paul, I'm having this specific issue, what is the process of you finding a solution? Like, how long is an average time? Because oftentimes people say, I made a request, I've called, no one has called me back, it's been over a month, they haven't responded. I mean, what can people expect when they call their state rep and say, well, I'm having this issue with this certain agency? What can they expect in that process?
So in terms of my specific response is it should be, and more often than not, it's automatic, right? Somebody sends me an email saying I have this issue. I would send them a response saying, thank you for letting me know. Let me try to figure out what's going. Now, once I contact that state agency, that becomes a whole, that potentially can become a whole nother issue with regard to how they address it. But usually every agency has what is called a legislative liaison. So those are the people that we would contact with regard to whatever issue that individual may be having with that particular agency. And so they're pretty quick to get back to us and trying to figure out how do we resolve that. And sometimes I just put them in direct contact with, because sometimes it's just a lot of information, and they just need to be able to talk to somebody, right? They've been contacting this agency or that agency, and to your point, no one's gotten back to them. So, right, I think your state representative it should be one of your first calls if you're having any issue, just so we know that the issue is going on. Now that agency maybe have responded quickly, problem solved. But I think it's important for us to be in the loop on whatever is happening, because this may be something that is happening to a lot of people, but everybody's in isolation. And so if it's a policy that needs to be reworked or rewritten to make sure that this issue doesn't impact anybody else going further, it's important for us to know that if this is a widespread issue or this is just one of those one-off circumstances.
Okay. And I think one other thing that sort of comes up, and that has come up for me recently, that I wasn't aware of, is, sometimes for small projects of, interest to the state, interest, to the community, that there's often maybe some sort of resources available. That some maybe organizations, some community groups that might be helpful for them to push a real important community initiative. How do people access those funds? They would probably call their state rep first, but it's just how, and this is sort of a conversation to say, this is available, and this, you can possibly talk to your state rep about this. So talk a little bit about that.
So there are, depending on what specifically you're referring to, agencies often have, several agencies often have community initiatives. And so I think involving or including your state representative and or state senator in your thought process, your vision, your mission about what you're trying to do can be helpful, because we can then figure out, okay, you've been contacting this particular agency, but that's not what that agency would do. Let's go over here and contact this agency over here, because they're more aligned with whatever you're trying to promote or trying to do within your community. For as an example, you wouldn't necessarily call judicial if you're trying to do some sort of health awareness or health activity or health engagement. You would call somebody at the Department of Public Health, and they typically do have resources that try to make public awareness campaigns and so on, in terms of whether it's this issue or that issue. And so including or involving your state representative when you're trying to access resources from the state, because that's part of our role too, right? Is our constituents and community organizations coming to us and saying, look, this is the problem we're having. It's widespread in our community. We need resources. This is our platform. These are ideas. We think this can work, but we need the funds and resources to make this possible. And so then it's incumbent upon us to think, okay, if we deem it valid, right? If we say, you know what, that is an excellent idea. You guys have done good work on a bootstrap budget for a long time. Let's see what state resources are available to help to bolster the efforts you're trying to do to make sure whatever issue you're trying to resolve is mitigated by the resources that the state can provide. And so I think it's important that all community organizations, for that matter, you absolutely, if you are housed in a specific district, your state representative and your state senator should be on your speed dial. Absolutely. And whoever you're trying to impact, whatever issues you're trying to address, and you may have a group of people, that whole group, right, should really be contacting their state representative and their state senator to help them understand why this is an important endeavor.
Thank you very much, because I think that's important. Again, I recently just kind of learned about that role, and that you're in that, that you have the ability, state reps have the ability to do something like that and have those conversations. So now we're in voting season. Primaries are next week.
Yes.
And part of this conversation is to ensure that we have informed voters. And so if a person wanted to know who was running in their district, where would they find out that information? How would they begin to look that up?
So it's a primary,
yep.
right? And so the first stop would be the registered voters office, right? So that's who would tell them who the in their particular district, as an example.
Yep.
So I don't have a primary opponent, so my name won't appear on the primary ballot. Senator McCrory, and so I'm just speaking about the 7th district. Senator McCrory doesn't have a primary opponent, so his name won't appear on the primary ballot either. The only folks that are going to be on the primary ballot are those in the presidential campaign, which are Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. So if you're in the 7th district, you will only see those two individuals on the ballot. However, if you live in the 5th district, which is currently represented by Brandon McGee, which is Northeast Hartford and Windsor, then you're going to see him on the ballot because there is a primary as far as that election is concerned. So you'll see him, Brandon McGee, and his opponent on the ballot in the 5th district, and you'll also see Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders in the 5th district. So depending on the district you live in, determines the names that you'll see on the ballot as far as the primary is concerned.
Okay. Yeah, because oftentimes, so I was putting out lawn signs the other day and someone said, who we voting for? And I'm like, his name ran me a president. And his thing was, who was that? How do I find out that information?
Right.
So I think it's always important that, and when we talk about, okay, you're voting for your state rep. Okay, so how do I find out who those people are? So that I can make an informed decision about who I want to represent me.
Right. So when you talk to people, if they're not receiving this newsletter, so all voters household of voters in the 7th district and all districts across the state, because we all mail these out. They receive these, and these are from your state representative and your state senator. And so if you're not receiving that, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, Republican, or independent, because we represent everybody once we come to represent it. So it's not just sent out to Democratic households, as an example. It's sent out to all households that have a registered voter in them. And so everyone should have received a copy of this. And so that tells you who your representative or your state senator are. Okay. And so my contact information is on there. So, so give me a call and introduce yourself.
So in your opinion, Representative Hall, why is state and local voting important?
There's an old adage, and I would say it never goes away, that all politics are local, right? And so the folks closest to you are the ones who can make the most impact. Like I said, resources come from the federal government. Now that matters too, right? That matters who is the president. It matters who controls the House of Representatives and who controls the Senate, because that's going to determine the resources that ultimately come to places like Hartford. And so that matters, right? And so those resources come down, and so they ultimately arrive in our city. And so our city is going to determine how those resources are used, right? And so that's why it's important that your city council, your board of education, your mayor, your state representative, state senator, to a degree, are the most important in terms of what directly impacts your life on a day-to-day basis. And so to me, that's why.
And so, I mean, again, I totally, concur that, and that's kind of the conversations that we often have. I mean, doing outreach is, who are we voting for? The president? Yeah, we're voting for the president. But we're also voting for, your state representative or, your senators. And these are kind of the things that they do. And this is why it's important to understand what they do as well. Because just like, local government, what you guys do is just as important because it's right here in Connecticut. So what advice would you give to a first-time voter?
Oh.
Or a
That is
person on the fence of voting.
the person on the fence of voting. So,
Yeah,
what I would,
not sure if they're going to be involved in the process.
so, right. So if you take the time to actually register to vote, right, it's incumbent upon you to do that. Everything in your life is ultimately determined by the policies that emanate from the state of Connecticut, the federal government for that matter, the state of Connecticut, and your city or town. And so, how everything happens once you step outside of your household is determined by policy. Those policies are written by lawmakers. And so, if you don't access that process, if you don't engage in that process, you're, from my perspective, abdicating a significant responsibility that you have not only to yourself, but to your family and your community. And so that's how important voting is to me. And just from a greater perspective, there are forces in this country that are trying to stop you from exercising your right to vote. That are trying to put all kinds of obstacles in the way. And in some respect, you have to ask yourself why. Why are they going through all these efforts to stop you from doing something that you have the right to do? And so, because they know how powerful it is, right? The one man, one vote, one person, one vote, excuse me, philosophy is so significant, it's so important because we have the ability to make changes, right? So, as an example, we passed a historic police accountability and police transparency accountability bill uh, 2 weeks ago, and it's signed by the governor last week. That doesn't happen, right, if certain people are in power. And so it matters every single day who is sent to the state legislature, who's sent to the halls of Congress, sent to City Hall, and who represents you. And so if you think there are challenges in your community, the only way, there's no, I'm gonna take that back. So personal responsibility, engaging in your community, trying to, do those types of things, engaging in civic organizations, trying to, but ultimately everything comes back to who is in power to ultimately make those decisions. Because at the end of the day, every community group in the world can say for ever that this is an issue we need to address. But if none of those people go out and vote for the representative who's like-minded and thinks it's an issue as well, then nothing will ultimately change. And so I think that's why it's so extremely important to vote. You're on mute.
And I mean, it's really important. But also, to continue that conversation, is what do we do after voting? Because oftentimes say, okay, voting doesn't do anything. I often get that as well. It doesn't do anything. But the important part is the work right after. So voting, I mean, I always say voting is just the beginning. It's not the whole solution, but it's that beginning that that step you have to take in order to kind of go down that road as that sort of responsible voter, by keeping your elected officials accountable. So if you want to speak to what people can do after they vote, in order to sort of create that change that they expect, that they want to see.
So as an example, after voting, it's important to stay engaged with the folks that you voted for, right? So, all politics is local. So after a city council election or mayoral election, it's important to stay engaged with your mayor and your city council, whether that's calling periodically, whether that's sending emails about challenges that your community is still faced with and trying to address with your state representative and state senator as well. But being in isolation, being by yourself, doesn't necessarily create the type of change that folks necessarily want to see. And so it's important to engage with the different civic organizations or community organizations that are in and around your community, because the greater the number, the greater the voice, right? So if you have several individuals who are championing a particular issue, that matters a whole lot more if it's a issue that needs to be addressed in the larger community. Now, there are individual things that people need to be have addressed, but if it's a community-wide issue, then folks need to come together within their community. For example, we have in the 7th district, we have the the NRZ. We have the next door where folks get updates about what's happening in the community. There's a monthly, it's called Block Watch meeting that talks about some of the challenges that we're facing here in our neighborhood, and we get updates from. So that when everybody's coming together and speaking with one voice, or everybody's engaged on a level, then government, from my perspective, has to respond. But we have other organizations like the Blue Hill Civic Association, as an example, that are addressing areas from youth employment, youth engagement, to our seniors. And so it spans the spectrum of the challenges that are within our community, but how we engage in that process to make sure that we're fully trying to address and resolve.
Okay, and if you could just explain kind of what the NRZ is, people that don't know what the NRC, what does it stand for and what do they do?
So I want to say it was around the year 2000, the state legislature, so that's policy, right? So that's your example, that's policy. Policy was passed by the state legislature that they would have these NRZs, or neighborhood revitalization zones. And so essentially what it says is, instead of a city or the federal government or what have you coming down and saying, excuse me, this is what's going to happen in your community, it flipped it on its head. And it said that neighborhood revitalization zone, the community is going to say, okay, what we want, what we need, what we want to have happen. So projects that are being proposed have to be vetted through, or should be vetted through that process of the NRZ with I don't want to say up or down vote, but in terms of having community input and community buy-in, because you don't want to plop something in the middle of the community and there be no support for it, or the community feels an affront that this is something that happened without engaging in that process. And so that's what should be happening.
Okay. I mean, thank you for saying that, for some people that just don't understand what they've heard the NRZs, but don't know exactly what they do and what their roles are in the community. And I think, lastly, one of the things that was also important for me for this conversation was to talk about, I think, a little bit about your path to becoming an elected official. Because oftentimes we also get, well, they don't do anything. We need change of leadership. But how do we sort of see these new leaders? How do they get an opportunity? How do they become an elected official? So if you want to speak about sort of your path and why you chose to be an elected official, and what you have to offer as far as being jewels to somebody that's thinking about, wanting to become an elected official, what does that look like?
So I was a teacher. Actually, I am a teacher, but I was a teacher for about 12 years at Weaver High School. And I was the advisor for a program called Youth in Government. And so I would take several students, as a YMCA program, take several students, and they would prepare bills, prepare legislation. We would go for a weekend stay in a hotel, go for a weekend and stay at the state capitol. They would argue and debate bills. And so I was always, I was a social studies teacher, so I was always interested in government. But also, my specific and personal history is that when I was in high school, I went to Hartford High. I was in high school. I have 4 friends, and when we were in high school, we made a pledge, right? We made a pledge that we would go away to college and come back and try to improve the community that we saw at the time. And at that time, in the late 80s and 90s, Hartford was touch and go for a minute. And to a certain extent, it still is, unfortunately. But I would argue that things have although there are several areas that we still need a lot of work in, there we made some projects, but we made this pledge, right, that we would come back. And so my way of coming back and helping and supporting my community was becoming a teacher, right? I thought, from my perspective, the best way to improve the lot of any people is through education, and so that's what. And I'm a firm believer that I didn't see anybody like me teaching me, especially in high
Yeah.
school. And so if you're not part of the solution, uh, you're not part of the solution, and you're part of the problem. So I wanted to make sure that I was the change I wanted to see. So I wanted to make sure that future generations would see a Black teacher, a Black male teacher. And so I went to Norfolk State University, and I came back and to be a teacher at Weaver High School. So community engagement, thinking about how we improve our community is something that has always been there. And so during that process, engaging in the Weaver community and doing all the things with students, but also making sure that I was connected to the community as well. So I first ran for public office as a town committee member. And so that was my first furlough into official elected office. And so that was my first entree into it.
Okay.
And so that was an interesting time. I was secretary of the town committee at the time. So in terms of leadership position, I had a leadership position there. But then ultimately, I became the treasurer of the Connecticut Democratic Party at the state level. And so I was always engaged in that process. I became a board member at Blue Hill Civic Association, where now I'm the vice chair. So just staying engaged in the community, but always thinking, okay, there's more that I can offer my community from a leadership perspective. And it happened that now Judge Eric Coleman, who was senator, he resigned to ultimately become a judge, which he did, thankfully, because we needed more Black judges. So Senator McCrory, who was Representative McCrory at the time, ran for his seat at state senate. And so once that happened, his state representative seat opened up. And I felt at the time, and I feel today, that I had something to say as far as my community was concerned. And so I stepped out and ran for office. So, in places like Hartford, New Haven, Bridgeport, these are heavily Democratic cities. And so, unfortunately, at the time, I did not get the Democrat endorsement in that, because it wasn't a primary, it was a special election. But what I did get was I got the Working Families Party endorsement. So that allowed me, after getting hundreds of signatures, allowed me to be on the ballot. And so that was a very interesting process. You really have to want to do this because it's about engaging your constituents, your neighbors, and sharing your vision of what you hope to happen within your community, and hopefully they feel the same. And so I was successful in that bid, and back in April 25th of 2017 was election day. And so that's my road. But I think the only roadblock to somebody running for public office, from my perspective, is them, right? Because if you want to do it, you can do it. Our system is very liberal with respect to folks who want to run for something. Right. So then, in terms of the standard that you have to meet in order to get on the ballot. Now, being successful in that endeavor is something entirely different, right? Because there are resources that come with, or that you have to have individually, or you can access because we have public financing at the state level. What is public financing? Public financing is Essentially, if you're running for state representative, as an example, you need to raise $5,000 and get 150 Hartford residents to give you at least $5 donation. So what does that do? That allows you access to $30,000 state grant, and that $30,000 state grant, essentially, in a place like Connecticut,
Mm-hmm.
In a city like Hartford, as an example, allows you to really allows you a lot of money to really engage in contact and make sure your message and your voice is getting out there. But outside of that, it's really going and knocking on doors. So you have to want to do it, and that's in the other side of that, you have to have the time to really go out and talk to people and help them understand and see who you are, and get that personal connection as far as you're somebody that is really going to be their voice at the state capitol. So I think more people should engage in the process at all kinds of levels. It's something as small as being on your school PTA, right? Because
Okay.
all that information trickles up. Whatever challenges you're having at your school trickle up to the Board of Education, may land at the mayor's foot, and ultimately may land at the state rep position. As an example, Weaver High School went through a lot of, in terms of funding for Weaver High School, went through a lot of iterations in terms of whether or not it was or was not going to happen. So the community spoke, but the community spoke to their representatives, and their representatives and senators made sure that that money or those resources were included in whatever school bonding project was going to happen. The same thing with Martin Luther King, that folks were going to let that building, because they can't tear it down because it's a historic place, right? And so they were going to let it sit there, but the community said no, we want a school on this site for our community, and the community spoke, and representatives and senators listened, and resources came for that school to happen, and it's going to, well, it was slated to be open. Knock on wood that it's still open, but it looks beautiful.
It looks beautiful.
It looks beautiful. I'm a block away from it, so
Yeah.
I saw it go through its in all of its iterations, and so
Yeah.
it's truly going to be a place where I think and hope that students are going to feel like this community cares about the education I receive, because we're going to put you in a place that has light.
Yeah.
that has the amenities that a school anywhere in this state or across the country would have, and so I think it's a good thing.
Yeah. So I think that concludes the information I thought that was really important. If there's something else that you think is important that I didn't ask or we didn't talk about, you can definitely chime in and say that important piece. But that's all I really had to cover in what I think would be at least helpful for that person that's thinking about voting or have voted and want to now do something, be civically engaged afterwards, for them to kind of get started in the process. So if you have anything.
I just say, the only thing I would say is that there's a lot of information out there, and a lot of information comes in a variety of different ways. I would just caution people to make sure that they look at the sources of that information, because there's a lot of misinformation that's going to people, especially regarding this pandemic that we're facing, whether the vaccine that's going to come out is good or bad. I would just say listen to experts. We all have gone to school, go to school, are in school, and so we should value those people who really look and study and understand these things, and not folks who are just stating their opinion, because their opinions are often not rooted in fact of the research that's necessary. But I would end in saying that this is probably this is the most important election of our lifetime. And so it's extremely important that if you're not registered to vote, to go register to vote, and to exercise that your ability to do that, because folks have lost their lives, to make sure that we have that right, and we should never let their lives be in vain. So make sure you go out there and vote.
Thank you so much, Representative Hall, for your time and for the great information. And we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much, Siobhan, and I
Have a
appreciate
good
it.
evening.
And everyone else have a good, and I hope everyone is staying safe. I know that folks are out there without power, such as yourself, and so hopefully those things get mitigated in short order. But if you have any issues, like I said,
I'll definitely call my state rep.
Right, exactly, exactly. But you know, and my information is there for folks to really reach out to me, and I hope to hear from a lot of people. So thank you, and everyone have a great evening.
Thank you.
Take care.